So NetEase, who's NetEase? What's NetEase? Why am I talking about NetEase? If you don't know who NetEase is, let me just quickly run through it. NetEase is a Chinese internet technology company founded by Dang Li. That sounded really racist, but that's his name. In 1997, it provides online services with content, community, and communications. But y'all aren't interested in NetEase. You're interested in NetEase games. That's what my channel's about. It's about video games. And NetEase games specifically is an important one. They're huge in the industry. They own a lot of developers, definitely not the most notable developers, but they own a lot of developers, and they've released some of the biggest hits, well, in the last 10 years, one of which being Marvel Rivals. Marvel Rivals obviously coming out of the gate, completely just smashing everything, and then releasing games like Once Human and many other games. They've released a lot of games. They also worked on a lot of games like Genshin Impact, and they're a huge mobile giant. But in 2020 or 2020, they made a huge push towards high quality AAA titles, similar to what PlayStation does, where they're these big budget AAA titles. And that led to them investing into more development studios. They invested into Quantum Dream, which have done games like Detroit Become Human. They worked on Heavy Rain. They worked on a lot of games. And right now they're working on Star Wars Eclipse. They bought even more studios like Rebel Moon, which was a Polish developer. They formerly worked on CD Projekt Red games like Witcher 3. They bought Liquid Sword. They bought a lot of studios in the West to pretty much focus on high quality, high budget AAA titles. And they might be thinking, okay, this is all cool and all, but what's the title? The title said that they're making changes, or I don't know what the title's going to be yet. I'm just going to be real with you. I don't know what the title's going to be yet. I haven't thought that far ahead. But specifically what I mean is just a week ago or 2-3 weeks ago, they announced they were laying off a team in America, one of their American teams, which worked on Marvel Rivals, which involved a creative director and I believe 19 other people, which is weird. Marvel Rivals is the biggest success of probably the 2020s so far, and they just fired, 20 people and a creative director. Why? Well, that makes no sense. Why would you lay off a team which released one of the most successful games for you? And then we lead on to this other article, which comes to a more concerning problem and bigger problem. So, this comes from Game Files. This entire interview, this thing, what they've been talking about. Yeah. So why did they lay off that team even though the game did very well? This might be the answer why. So here's what was said. A few years ago, after announcing the creation of or acquisition of nearly 20 Western studios and Japanese game studios geared towards making new big budget video games, Chinese giant NetEase is pulling back big time. Signs of that shift began appearing last November with the suspension of operations and job cuts at Canadian developer Worlds Untold, a studio NetEase had unveiled just a year prior. January saw a similar combo of production froze, spending cuts, and the need for new funding at Seattle-based Jar of Specs, I think that's how you say that. Studio NetEase had been proud to announce in July of 2022, only 2 years prior. A third studio, Sweden-based Liquid Swords, announced on Monday that it was laying off workers due to shifting market conditions. NetEase had invested in the studio in 2022, again just 2 years prior. But the cuts are not ending there, GameFile has learned. Now, I'm going to ask a very simple question. What do all these studios have in common? What's something that they're like, what's the one thing all these studios have in common, which some of you may already know, is they're all Western studios. They're all studios based in the West. If that's Sweden, if that's America, if that's Canada, these are all Western studios. What could this mean? Let's continue the article. NetEase is actively shopping around for more of its non-Chinese studios, many of the very same ones it announced over the last 3 years. Two people familiar with the company's efforts told Game Files neither individual was authorized to speak about NetEase plans publicly. One of the Game Files sources says NetEase plans to divide itself of the majority of its overseas teams, leading to the potential closure of more than a dozen game studios if they can't secure new post-NetEase funding. which is insane. Let me continue the article. A NetEase rep declined to comment to game files on these cuts, let alone the scale of more than a dozen that I've heard about. But they did say that all the studios and projects are in consistent review and evaluation, and NetEase will determine the changes needed to be made throughout that process in a season of hunt of more which. For more of the games industry, a further NetEase pullback is likely to deliver pain around the globe. That's what was said. So let's just break this down. What this means specifically, and you may have already understood this, but NetEase is pulling back from the West. They're not interested in funding the West. They're not interested in funding these studios that are in the West. Now, we don't know the specific reason why. It could be it's getting too expensive for them. It could be NetEase Games just doesn't have the money. It could be something the Chinese government is planning on doing, if that's closing borders or making it quite hard to communicate with these studios or communicate with the outside world. It's similar to a North Korea situation, which sounds really extreme, but wouldn't shock me at all, where China just goes really closed borders. It could happen. I don't feel like it's going to happen, but that could be another reason. It could just be shifts in China itself. Maybe they just don't want to have the risk of running the risk of all these studios that are outside of China in Europe and all that stuff. But realistically, those are just guesses. We don't know the real reason why they could be doing this. Probably the most reasonable reason, and the reason I think a lot of people have come to, is money. It's probably just costing them too much to run all of these large studios with 200 to 300 plus employees around the world. It's ridiculous. It would cost way too much. Which then goes on to the last thing. Hey, so it's actually editing me, Easton editing me. I was just editing this video like a week later because it just took me a little while to get to it. And we actually got an article on the reason why NetEase has started to pull back in the West. And it's very simple. Profit margins. Literally that simple. NetEase CEO has officially come out, or not really officially, but it's more speculation, but it seems like this is the main reason being. NetEase right now is making a heap of money, but very little of that is actual profit. Main reason being, they've got all these studios to upkeep, they've got thousands of employees to upkeep. So what do? To start getting a bigger profit margin, they shut down studios, they fire people, they lay off heaps of people that are costing them a large amount of money to keep here, to keep around. So the profit margins go through the roof. So they're pretty much shutting down studios in the search of profit, which is huge L. Like, that's just a huge NetEase L. So yeah, practically what this means is any studio that isn't consistently bringing in a large amount of money, and any team that isn't consistently bringing in a large amount of money, will get shut down. Another thing to remember is the reason why they're specifically targeting Western studios is because it's cheaper to manage a studio in China where they're headquartered than a studio halfway across the world. A studio halfway across the world is going to cost more to upkeep, just in general. So that's the reason why it seems like the reason why they're going towards, well, this big push towards shutting out a lot of these studios, mainly just for profit, which is a scummy way to do it, but I can also understand why. It's very interesting. I'm going to let you get back to the video. The rest of the video does have a lot of more interesting information, and yeah, good. Bye. Which, before we go into this, one thing to remember is this could mean two things. They close a studio, or they sell the studio. So what they're clearly doing is they're looking over the games, they're looking over the studios and seeing how far their game is from release and how much, well, hope they have in their project. If the hope is low and the game is far from release, it could most likely mean the closure of the studio. If the game is close to release and they have high hopes for the game, it could mean the release of the game, and if the game does well, they decide to keep the studio. If the game does poorly, they'll probably end up shutting down the studio. Pretty much meaning most of the studios that are owned by NetEase that aren't in China or specifically Asia, are most likely, they're walking on ice. They're standing on ice right now. Like the ice in Astro Bot, how it breaks underneath you and you got to keep running. You know, something like that. I know it's kind of a shit example, but that's the example, probably the best example I can come to. They're on ice. If their game flops or their game is too far from a release, or they can't release it within probably the next 2 years, it looks like NetEase could shut them down, which is a huge worry because some of these studios like Rebel Wolves are working on really cool and creative games. And same with Quantum Dream. But I can give you a little bit of hope for Quantum Dream specifically. If you're excited for Quantum Dream's new game, which is their Star Wars Eclipse, you shouldn't worry too much because this was said officially by the Quantum Dreams CEO. So here's what was officially said. Quantum Dreams is unaffected by the NetEase layoffs, and development on Star Wars Eclipse continues at full pace, says CEO. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because I will completely butcher that. But this gives a little bit of hope for anyone who is excited for Quantum Dream's next game. So it seems like they're unaffected, which is very, very good. Obviously, there's been times in the past where the CEOs have come out and been like, hey, guess what? The studio's unaffected, but then like a month later, they've been shut down. But the specific reason why they're not being shut down or they're not being affected by these layoffs is very simple. And it's just because they're working on a big title game. They're working on a game on an already existing franchise as big as Star Wars. You know what I mean? They're not going to shut down a studio which is working on such a large collaboration project like Star Wars, and a studio with a lot of promise, a studio that previously their games have sold very well. Recently, Detroit Become Human has apparently just sold 20 million units, which is fucking insane. 20 million is nuts. You know what I mean? So it makes sense why Quantum Dream would be unaffected by these layoffs. So it makes sense, but it wouldn't be the first time CEOs come out and said, we're not going to be affected, and then they get affected. So, but it is a big title. It's a collaboration title. So it's good to have some sort of reassurance because, you know, let's be real here. Quantum Dream's a great studio. They've released some great games. Even if you don't like their type of style of games, they're the best at what they do. Probably next to something like Supermassive Games, which just, they do amazing with their story games. But I'm yapping. Getting back onto the article itself, it's very interesting, but realistically, outside of Quantum Dream, this could mean the termination of any studio within there. The unlikely ones that may probably aren't going to be shut down is like Rebel Wolves, because Rebel Wolves is very close to releasing their game, so they're most likely not going to be laying off from studios like Rebel Wolves. But you know, studios such as I don't know what Jar of Spags are doing, or Spigs. I don't know what Liquid Sword's doing, but it looks like something like Liquid Sword, which clearly their game is very far from release. It seems like they could be shut down, but I'm going to be completely real with everyone here, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I have no clue what the development process of any of their games are. I don't know what their games are. I don't know what they're working on. I don't know how far they are from release date. I don't know anything about Liquid Swords or Untold Worlds. I don't know Worlds Untold. I don't know anything about these studios, so I can't judge them too much, but what I can say for certain is it looks like Quantum Dream is safe, and Rebel Wolves will most likely be safe too. Rebel Wolves also working on another game called Blood of the Dawnwalker, which looks incredible. I can't wait for that game. And with that game being so close to release date, most likely coming out this year, it's very unlikely those two studios get shut down. But for me, and from my knowledge, the rest of the studios are really, they're fair game. Anything could happen. But it looks like a lot of the studios that are based in China, and mostly the ones in Japan and most of Asia, seem to be safe because that's close enough to the headquarters of NetEase, but studios outside of there could be in danger. But anyways, I want to know how y'all feel about these layoffs, about what's happening with NetEase. I want to know, do you have any theories about what could be happening over at NetEase? I have no clue, truly, but that's my kind of insight of what I think's happening, and, well, clearly what is happening with NetEase, because, well, we know what's happening with NetEase. Clearly they're scaling back in the West, but, you know, I'm interested to see the reason why. I want to know how y'all feel about this. I want to know some theories. You know, what studios do you think will get shut down? And do you know anything about a lot of the studios like Liquid Sword? I have no clue about, because I don't know what they're working on. Have you been following studios like Liquid Swords or Worlds Untold? Because I haven't. I want to know what they've been working on. Have you been following their games for a long time? I don't know. I want to know, do you know anything about these studios? Because I really don't. But I'm yapping. I'm talking too long. I want to know how y'all feel about these layoffs, how you feel about everything that's going on with NetEase. It's really sad, but I want to know how y'all feel, and y'all good. Bye.